What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Powered by Primus, and in today's video we're going to be talking about how to evaluate your deck's power level and why that even matters. Now, my voice is still a little weird, so I do apologize, but man, I'm just too excited to get back into it. I just gotta get a video out there. Now, like I said previously, we're going to be talking about a deck's power level. Now, first off, what is a deck's power level? Well, the deck's power level is going to be where it ranks on a certain system that I will be showing you guys and breaking down in this video, talking about how your deck performs, how strong your deck is, and all of the other things involved with it. Now, the main reason behind this is to make games more fair, to help players understand where that deck is, and to just have an overall better experience. If you're new to card games, this is going to be kind of a new and maybe a little bit more of an eye-opening thing, but if you're not, you understand how a deck's power level works, whereas if you're playing with a deck that's on the power level of like 8 and you go up against someone who's got a level 1 or a level 2, it's not going to be a fair match by any means. The person with a level 8 is just going to crush them. Nobody's having fun because you're just destroying this opponent. Your opponent's not having any fun because they're not seeing what their deck's doing, what it's trying to do, understanding mechanics and a lot of other things, and maybe that's going to scare off that player, or maybe that player is just going to be really depressed. And again, why are we playing this if we're not having fun? Which is always the overall thing that we want to be doing. The next part is growing the community. So making sure that we have a lot of these decks on the same power level when we're playing is going to make games way more fun, more memorable, and want people to play more. I heard it from a wise man once who told me when he was playing a game and ended up coming down to the last swing, he goes, "You know you've created a good game when it just comes down to that last swing. We did a good job." And you did a great job. When it comes down to those last matches, it's always a nail biter, but you have so much fun when you're like, okay, if he flips 3 orange battle icons, I just lose. But if he flips 2, oh, I've got a chance. And then you start to flip those cards, and you start to have a lot more fun, and it becomes a really close match, and that's what we always want to have. Now, obviously, there's going to be those situations where that doesn't happen. You don't always have to have a power level of 6 going up against a power level of 6. You can definitely have, a 7 versus a 5, or you can have a 6 versus a 9. There are definitely those kind of situations where you can have those things, and one thing I will talk about is how to skew your deck's power level a little bit, but we'll get to that at the end of the video. So this is going to be a really awesome breakdown of how to figure out where your deck currently sits, some cards that can elevate those decks, some of the cards that can even bring down some of those decks, and some stuff like that. I'm going to try to put some science to it, some numbers to it, so let's get into it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about before we really get into the levels is how this is subjective. Now, there are a couple of things that come into play with this, and some stuff that just can make your deck not gradable as far as to other people or yourself, is if you're just not being honest. One thing that's really easy to do is to go, "I built a deck that's unbeatable, alright," and then you sit down and play and you're like, "I lost every match, alright." And some of that is going to come down to a learning curve where you think this deck could be a 9, and then you play it and you're like, "Oh, well, it's missing this, 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 and this." But now you have a new number where you can sit back and go, "Okay, this is what I thought the deck was, but now this is where we're at." Now, you're always going to have that when you sit down at a table. You sit down, and I don't tell you to always sit down and have your opponent go, "Okay, what's your power level?" "Nope, I can't play this." Always continue to play, especially if you're in your local game area and you play with a group of friends. You guys all know where you kind of play. Sometimes someone's bringing some jank, sometimes someone's bringing something that's busted. You kind of know where it's always at, but this is more designed for when you go out into the wild, when you're playing in a new game store, you have someone, new come around, or maybe you're the new person and you can kind of ask people, where you're at, or maybe you're at a different city and you're playing, or maybe it's at a tournament that you go to, or even something like PAX or the Energon Invitational. You can go there and maybe you bring a couple of different decks. This is something that I do. So no matter who I play, I kind of know what deck to be playing. Again, you don't want to just crush somebody, or you don't want to bring in something super, underpowered and then you just get crushed as well. You always want to be playing as fair as possible. So back to the point at hand. Misskewing your deck. The other thing that you can miskew it is that you're just not honest. Let's say you sit down and you play against somebody and you see their characters come out and you know that their deck is like, maybe a 4 or a 5. It's got some like kind of spicy stuff, but you just know that you're going to crush it. Don't go, "Oh yeah, no, my deck, it'll be a close game," and then you just completely run away with it, because again, you're not challenging yourself as a player, and your opponent is just not in the same realm of gameplay as far as this game goes, and maybe they're trying something out and you just didn't even give them that opportunity to try stuff out. You always want to kind of see where a deck is at. Some of these levels are also going to be kind of like that experimental level, kind of where this is where I'm going to start building a deck and see if it has room to go up or down. A lot of the testing that we do and stuff like that will kind of fall into some of these categories as well. And you also don't want to like go to a game or a tournament and you kind of see what's around and you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be fair, this is going to be fair, and then you just go undefeated and crush everybody. Again, it's just not honest, it's not fair, and people just aren't having fun. Now, if there are, prizes on the line, if there's cash on the line, if there's all, exclusives on the line, it's a tournament setting. You kind of have to understand to bring your best deck to those kind of scenarios. Now, if you guys are doing like a themed week or whatever else, yeah, be that person. But if you are going into like a big heavy setting tournament, understand that you are going into something very competitive and you are going up against really good decks. So don't get mad when you're on the opposite end of the scale and you're like, oh, I brought something just really fun and I got beat. Unfortunately, that's going to kind of be the way of the world when it does come to these big end of tournaments. But then again, on the other side, if you're going to a casual event, don't bring something that's just going to completely crush everybody. Now we're going to be doing this scale on a 10 level system, and level 1 and level 2 are going to be beginner. Now the way that I always look at these two levels is it's really someone who just got into the game. Maybe they bought one of the starters and like 4 packs of cards. That's where these decks are going to really kind of be in. Someone just happened to have maybe 7 characters and they go, all right, these are the 3 characters that I'm just going to mess with. It only comes out to like 22 stars. Then there's no star cards in the deck. Their battle cards are just completely random. You're running like Static Laser of Ironhide, but you don't even have Ironhide. You're just running some really interesting things that are going to be in the deck. Now, Static Laser of Ironhide is still +3 and just deals 2 damage, so it's still a good card in some situations. But for the example in this is that it doesn't have its full use, and it's not being used for just the +3, but because it just was a card that they happen to have. Maybe there's cards that, affect only Autobots, but they're just all Decepticons. But they're in there just because it's a blue battle icon. And they just needed to get to 40 cards, and that was one of the cards they had. So this is going to be that very entry level. The person's trying to just understand the mechanics. They're starting to learn how to flip their character cards, learning sequencing, learning, oh, okay, this is how attack works, this is how defense works. Again, this is the beginner level. This is just where you are getting in or someone else is getting in and they're just trying to understand things. So obviously this is the time, if you're playing against someone in these levels or you are someone in these levels, this is the time to ask questions and answer questions. Have someone go, oh, you know what, no, it's okay, you can show me your hand, let's talk about, some of the cards in your hand, let's talk through some of these plays and let's try to help you. Oh, this card, I don't think you really need that much because of this, so, I've got these couple of cards with Mia here, I can, trade with you or help you out. This is where the community part will start to really build up and start to become a really awesome thing. A lot of people, and I can understand this, it's your collection, keep your cards. However, me and I know someone else that we play with, we have quite a bit of a collection, so when we get new people come in, we're just like, here's cards, go for it, play, build, because we want that person to get engaged, we want that person to have fun and go, oh, well, now my deck is just way cooler because of this one card, thanks. I mean, even if you do a trade, you work out whatever you work out. The point for these levels is to understand that this is the bottom line and this is where you begin. The next level coming in here is going to be 3 to level 4, and that's going to be casual. Now, my version of casual is going to be slightly different. I know some people go, hey man, casual can be, a level 7, a power level 7 deck, and I go, no. The reason why I say casual is because there are certain things that create and make this thing casual. It's someone who's maybe running Optimus Prime Freedom Fighter because they're just an Optimus Prime fan and that's the only card they have. They don't have access to Battlefield Legend or General Prime or Galactic Prime, and they're just like, I like Freedom Fighter and he gets to heal my Autobots. That's a really cool thing. I want it to be a theme deck for me and have it be like an Autobots, duking it out deck, or maybe they only have one copy of a rare, card in the deck, like let's say in the same situation. They have one Ion Blaster of Optimus Prime. They're like, cool, if I eventually get to it, it's like this awesome card that I'm going to play, and then if not, alright, I don't get to it, or maybe it's the person's playing with all like misprint cards as far as uncut cards or faded cards, and the cards don't really serve a purpose, but he's like, oh, this whole deck is going to have faded cards, or whatever else the case may be. Maybe it's even someone's first try at deck building, and they're not very good at it, and they haven't done a lot of research to see what else is out there, and they're just like, boom, this is what I'm putting together, it's my first try. And then again, in this situation, with these levels, I don't believe that your deck is going to have ways of responding or messing around with what your opponent is doing. No interactions whatsoever. It's really easy when you build your deck where I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do, and then you sit down and play, and you're like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting my opponent to do that. Now what? Well, I don't have anything, so here's this, and let's see what they do. And it's kind of the slugfest back and forth, but there's not interaction on your side. So you don't have cards to play from behind. You're not running like vaporizes or ramming speeds to help get rid of your opponent's stuff. You're just bare minimum going in there with what you got. And this, again, is just going to be kind of your entry level to the deck. Some people can use these levels as their starting point when it comes to building decks. A lot of people will sit down, build a deck, and go, okay, this is what I want the deck to do. Now let's go live fire it. They play it and go, okay, it's got potential. This is where I can do this, but I got to try to add this. But sometimes you end up doing too much and completely changing the deck, which again puts that deck in that 3 to 4 level, and you know that, and you move on to something different. Now the next tier that we're going to get into, or the next levels I guess we're going to get into, is levels 5 and level 6, which are going to be tuned. So this is the level that we ascended from on the previous level. These kind of decks, you finally got your team in a decent spot. You really kind of like where you're at with it. You're starting to tune some of those things. You're like, I tried playing with 3 of this one card, wasn't doing too well. I'm going to come down to 2 of this card. You know, maybe you finally got that third, copy of that battle card that you were trying to get, and you're like, okay, cool, boom, now I finally got this third battle card that I was trying to get into there. But you're still kind of in the learning phase. You're still trying to understand your sequencing. You're still trying to understand what you're supposed to be doing, and you're still not really fully playing around what your opponent can be doing. You're just sitting down, you're going, I'm kind of ready for it, let's start to duke it out. Maybe you have that theme that you've pushed a little bit farther. You now have this new card that, will start to push this around, or maybe you missed a trigger that you just didn't quite fully understand in the earlier levels, and now you're starting to move forward. Again, this deck could be pretty well. We're going to be in this spot. We've tuned it up a little bit. It's going to naturally do better, but we still aren't really quite in that I'm winning every game. I'm going to be talking about it here at the end of the levels. Really, what turn that you're kind of pushing to beat your opponent is going to judge a lot of these levels as well. Even something that's tuned can be really well, but even if it's tuned and you're not, being able to beat your opponent until like your turn 10, it's really kind of different than when your opponent can beat you on their turn 3. So it just changes up things just a little bit, and a lot of that is going to come down, obviously, to these power levels, right? But in this one, we're going to be looking at that tuned amount. It's going to be you started to get to that deck to the good spot where you're starting to like it. And again, this is still room for improvement. We've upgraded from the previous one of casual. We got this deck. We kind of like where we're at. But now we need to see if we can take it up even further to the next level, or maybe that this is just where this deck stands, is that maybe is kind of more of a fun deck. Yeah, we're going to go a little bit into the longer games, but you know what? I'm going to Volcanicus you, and that is worth it for me. Now getting into the next levels, we're going to have level 7 and level 8, which are going to be optimized. Now these decks are going to be designed to do what they're going to do, but still have ways of responding to their opponent and have interaction cards. So these are the decks that you were previously playing. You've maybe upgraded a character card, you dropped a star card so you can try to, put in a different character card in your team lineup, or maybe vice versa. You lowered one of your characters from a 7-star to a 6-star to pick up it because it's a battle master and you get to get a star battle icon card. You've optimized these decks to be able to make sure that on your turn, you know what you're doing, you know your sequencing, you know what cards you're supposed to be playing, and now it is truly a slugfest with your opponent. You go, I know I have vaporizes or ramming speeds in the decks or bashing shields. I know I've got my responses to my opponent's stuff. I just have to go through the motions. I know on my turn 1, I flip my scrapnel and I attack with my scrapnel. I know on my turn 2, I do this. I know these plays, and now it's just a matter of getting the cards and actually going through the motions. Yes, there's moments where your opponent's like, well, boom, I'm going to blow up your weapon. And you're like, all right, cool. Well, I was ready for this, so bam, I play another weapon. I'm still going to send this guy. And then your opponent's like, what? It's really, really fun stuff once you start to get to these levels, because you have that true back and forth, because your deck is optimized and designed to do it. So now that your deck has been optimized, you've figured out what you're supposed to be doing, you really know that this deck is in a solid spot, you're ready to go, what's the next level? The next level is level 9, and that's competitive. Now in this level, these are the decks that have been optimized, have been ran through the testing process, and are now ready for a tournament. Whether it's a Saturday night event, or even if you're just playing with your buddy but you guys both want to play at this high skill level, you start to play some of these competitive decks. But these decks are designed to do really well. It's your opponent's playing a good deck, right? Your opponent's going to draw a card, and guess what? It's going to be a good card. Your opponent's going to flip and, do something with their character. It's going to be good. The one thing that's always really funny is when people sit down and play in these competitive, matches and go, man, this guy just blew me out, or he just attacked me for like 17. It's what the decks have been designed to do. They've been optimized to reach those kind of, stages, or they're like, hey, I know that I need to have 11 weapons in my deck so I can do this every single turn 1 or every single turn 2. They've been designed to do that. Now, obviously, again, like I talked about in the beginning of the video, if you're playing a competitive deck and you're going against someone who's on that, casual side of things, you're going to crush that person. And they're not really going to get to be able to even learn if their deck has potential to start to make its way up the levels, or if it's just, all right, well, I got beaten, I just need to play that guy's deck, and then you find yourself online just finding decks and building decks, which is totally fine. But those decks, again, remember, they have been optimized, they've been tested, and they are ready for the big show. Now again, these competitive decks have been tested. The character cards are specifically selected. There are sideboard characters, or I guess a sideboard character. There are sideboard cards that are designed to be brought in for certain matches. They have been through the ringer with testing, and they are very good decks. But what's level 10? If level 9 is competitive and level 8 is optimized, level 10 is broken. Level 10 is busted, level 10 is OP, level 10 is godly, whatever you want to call it, unfair, that's where level 10 goes. And the reason why I don't have level 9 and level 10 as competitive is because I think there is actually a difference. The one thing that can really be weird in a lot of card games, and if you've played card games for a long time, you understand every once in a while there's a king deck that comes out. This deck that makes every other deck just fear it. You sit down across the table, you look at the characters and just go, ugh, good game, and you just don't even want to play. You know what the results are going to be, and even if you try your best, maybe you'll make it extend 2 or 3 more turns, whatever the case may be. Now, I will also say that these decks are far and few between. You will have these monsters of the meta that will show up every once in a while, but decks will start to, in the optimized side and then the competitive side, will start to adapt to it, right? They'll go, if this deck is always around and it's so good, what do I do to, go up against it? They'll put those cards in there, and then that deck that was in this level 10 slot will eventually just become a competitive deck, or maybe even just an optimized deck because people are just so well teched for it. It just doesn't win nearly as much as you thought it would. And then again, this level becomes open, which is why I think that they need to be a separate thing. Is level 10 is temporary. It really isn't anything where your deck gets to just remain there. Believe me, if there was one deck that was always a level 10 and always won, wouldn't everybody just play it? The answer is yes, they would. But because there are other ways that you can respond to it and build to go around it, then now that deck is no longer a 10. I will say currently, there are only 2 decks that I know of that sit in this 10 slot where we're at. Now, the one is going to be the Daring Escape deck that Blaine Bublitz did put up. I really hope I said your last name right. Who put up his deck. I legitimately think that that deck is ridiculously strong. Now, the reason why I say that the deck is ridiculously strong is not only being able to win on his turn 2, which, by the way, is a very real thing, is the fact that your opponent's interactions with it are very minimal. Now, this is where the power scales will start to really shift. Is if I have a Vaporize in my deck, don't worry about it. I got 2 of them in my deck, and I got Bashing Shields, and I got Sabotage Armaments. I'm ready for a game. But on my opponent's turn 2, after I didn't play anything, he just wins the game. I don't get to interact at all. I don't get to play anything. I have to hope that I have turbo board, or I hope that I have to get, some other type of card to be able to try to win, or maybe removal, and I have to just keep hitting the upgrades and trying to make them scrap cards so that deck doesn't go off. Now, does it consistently go off on his turn too? Maybe, maybe not. Do I think the deck is fair? I think there are ways of fighting against it. Winning against it is a different conversation. I think it has to be a very specific match. There's a bunch of other things that come into play, but that's why I think that his deck belongs in this 10 level slot, is because how consistent it is, how good it is, how much it restricts your opponent, how much pressure you put on your opponent, and it's all just sitting down to play the game. It's not like, okay, well, by turn 10, I'm going to have this lock set up and you lose. No, that deck is ready to go when you sit down, and congratulations to him for being able to build something so strong. Now, there have been other Daring Escape decks that did really well and can combo at the end of your turn and stuff. Those decks were really good, but they did drop a little bit when people started to know a little bit of things, and Wizards of the Coast did respond to it and stuff like that. Now, I don't want this deck to turn into a Daring Escape video. It's not whatsoever. I just wanted to make sure that you guys can understand the difference with the decks that are in this spot versus in the other spot. Now, I did say that there was another deck that lived in this level 10 spot, but I honestly am not going to be talking about it. It's very much off the radar, and I want to very much keep it off the radar. So, talking about decks that are, living in the competitive world versus in the optimized world. In the competitive world, this level 9 slot, I think that we have Galaxy Prime, Dan Arnold. He did win the Energon Invitational, who was running this list. I think the deck is very competitive. I think the deck is very good, partially because it has a really good board state naturally, and then it has a lot of ways of interacting with your opponent. It's one thing that can really change these levels back and forth, which we'll talk about here in just a second, but it's being able to just interact with your opponent, and the deck has it built in to where it continuously is progressing its board state and doesn't really have to worry about what its opponent starts to do because it has lots of responses for it. Another one is going to be these Airstrike Patrol, Battle Patrols that are very, very aggressive with Impactor or General Prime in there. Those decks are very competitive, really good, able to just attack for like 12 damage every single attack. Just turn this 4-star character sideways and deal 12 is like, what? That's a lot of damage. We got Shockwaves who are going to live in this area. I've seen some 2-tall decks that are going to live in this area, and it's just, again, because they're very optimized. Their character cards are very specific, and you'll start to see a lot of these character cards that'll kind of be, in the same general power level that just make the deck naturally better. Shockwave demands just a really good deck, and the character itself just demands your respect. You have to understand that is a really good character, and he's going to do really good things, so he should be a really high-powered level character. It's really hard for you to build like a bad major Shockwave deck. You'd have to try to not, because there are so many cards that just work so well with the character that it just makes things really easy. Again, Galaxy Prime, really good character. There's just a lot of support for the character. General Prime, you got Lord Megatron, Nemesis Prime. There are a lot of characters that start to really just naturally up your deck's power level, because when you start to build around them, it naturally will make your deck better. So obviously, if you follow those stronger characters, those more powerful characters, you will naturally start to raise your deck's power level. Nothing against Cup, but if you try to build a deck with Cup, it's going to be a little bit harder. You're going to have to spend a little more turns or spend some more battle cards to try to get him in the same spot as when you go up against some other, relatively like, 7-star, 8-star characters that are on the same level or maybe 1-star higher, but have completely different stats, way better stats. It's kind of hard to argue where that power level is going to be. Now, the next thing we're going to be talking about is how to plus or minus your power level in your deck. Well, this is where, you say my deck is at, Jamie's at this level 4, but how do I go up? How do I go down just on a natural base? And there's a few different ones that we're going to be talking about. First one that we're going to be talking about is resilience. How resilient is your deck against your opponent's stuff? If your deck is just, kind of in that 5 or 6 tier because of the way that you built it or whatever else, you're still, kind of in that tuned area, but it's really resilient to what your opponent's trying to do. Maybe you just lock out your opponents to where even their cards just don't matter. This is naturally going to push your deck from maybe that tuned to maybe more of an optimized because you've designed it to be able to do so. The other thing that's going to be able to change every single level in every single deck is just player skill. Player skill can change 2 or 3 levels up or down. You can go out and pick out a deck that you see online that does really, really well. Go play it and go, man, I just got like 0-3'd in this tournament. And it's because maybe your player skill just wasn't quite there yet. You didn't fully understand certain turns or certain interactions or certain sequencings, or you didn't understand exactly what your opponent was doing, so you didn't really know what and when to be ready for things. So that made your player skill, bring that deck down a little bit. Whereas vice versa, you could be playing a deck that's kind of tuned, or maybe it's optimized. Your opponent's like, here's something I've been messing around with, and then you just naturally know how to respond, or maybe you really know that what your opponent's playing. You go, okay, cool, well, I should play this card this turn. I will play this card, whereas your opponent would have been like, oh man, I wasn't expecting that, because you just naturally have that better player level, or you saw them pick up a green battle icon, or you saw a card flip in the beginning of the game, and you're like, okay, I saw that. I see you. And later on, you play around it, and they're like, oh, I didn't, oh, that sucks. And you're like, yep, saw it after the first defensive flip, or whatever else the case is. That's going to naturally make you move up or down on these power levels. Now the next few ones are going to be human error, time restraints, win conditions, and a few other things like that. Human error is entirely just a possible thing. I've played this game for a long time. I've played card games for a very, very long time. And sometimes you just make a play mistake. It's something that you'll hear quite often from a lot of people where they're like, oh, I just messed that up. The other day I was even playing against another player, and I just completely forgot to flip my character and just decided to play an upgraded attack and go, oh, I just didn't even flip. And it's because I know in my head I'm supposed to flip my character and play that card. Human error, wasn't paying attention. I just didn't. It's entirely possible. Or maybe you missed a tough one trigger, or you missed activating your secret action. Those are just human errors. The card's there. You have it built in. You built it to do what it's supposed to do. You just failed to do it. Now, time restraints is going to be something that's going to change these decks' power levels as well. Now, nothing on my Volcanicus deck back in the day, but the deck was really powerful. I was able to overheal my Volcanicus like 3 times. And I'm just using this as an example. But I was able to get it to 150, 200 damage that my opponent had to try to put through my character. But because of time restraints, the deck was terrible. There was no way that I was ever probably finishing one match, let alone trying to go through best of 3s in those time frames. So even if you have a really, powerful, heavy blue deck, and you're like, my opponent is only going to maybe hit me for 1 every turn if they're lucky. Well, if you're not finishing them, and you're not ending the game yourself in the certain time frame, well then your deck's not really that strong, because, well, now the 50 minutes are up, and you guys are going to have to go to the unintentional draw steps, which isn't really that fun. Maybe you can win because you have more health, but again, it's just kind of a really weird thing. It's going to bring your deck's power level down. Now, let's bring your power level the opposite way, and let's say you're like, this is a super aggressive, heavy orange battle icon deck. I have, maybe let's go with my Thrustimus deck, since we're talking about, weird out-of-the-box ones. That deck can put out, 15, 20 damage in one swing, and that counts as 1 turn. And I'm like, attack for 20. Oh, your character gets KO'd. Great. Oh, you didn't hurt me. 20. Your character's down. Well, this time restraint, man, now I got 30 minutes. I can go to the bathroom, or I can hang out. I can go watch some other matches. It's going to bring that deck's power up a little bit just because of how quick it can finish a game. If you're constantly finishing at like that 40-minute, 45-minute mark, then you're in a pretty good spot. But if you're finishing your opponents in like 12 minutes, believe me, your deck's pretty good. And the next one is win condition. Now, this is something that I talk to pretty much every single person about when it comes to talking about how to build a deck, what they should be doing. What's your win condition? How are you going to beat your opponent? That is one of the biggest questions that you should be asking yourself when it comes to deck building in general, is what's the point of the deck? If the point of your deck is going, I'm just going to run 3 Megatrons because I just really like Megatron, well, that's cool, but how are you going to win? I don't know. That's going to bring your deck's power level down, because yeah, you've got a really cool thing, maybe you've got some powerful cards, but you just don't know how to seal the deal. You're just going to be like, oh, I guess I'm just going to attack him for 5 every turn and hope that KOs him. It probably won't. So coming up with a win condition is very, very powerful, and that's why alternative win conditions can be very, very strong. Talking about like overwhelming advantage, talking about daring escape. Now we're starting to see some of these cards. It generates a win condition. It's a card that says, I win, and you just have to now try to build something around those cards. Well, you can look at, well, my way of winning is attrition. I'm going to play Battlefield Legend, and I'm going to get free actions for days, and I'm going to be able to flip him back to alt mode and pick up more actions. I'm going to win the long game, and you can go, great. That is a win condition. You know how your deck's going to get there. I'm on Lord Megatron. My opponent's going to have to reshuffle. I'm going to make them just do so much damage. I'm going to attack for 15, and they're going to have to shuffle, and that's how I'm going to win. Great. That's a win condition. Now, how often that win condition works will kind of change things. Obviously, you can sit there and say, well, I want to triple overwhelming advantage my opponent in one turn, but the chances of you doing that, aren't that high. But if you go, okay, well, I pulled this thing off 10 times in a turn or in a game, great, then that's a good win condition. It's consistently working. But if you're like, yeah, I was supposed to do this, but like out of 10 games, it happened once. Well, maybe that's not your win condition. Maybe you should try to figure something else out. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the turn in which the deck threatens to win the game. Now, this is a really important thing because this game doesn't really last a really long time. Other people talk about like if some games can go for like 20 turns, and I'll tell you what, I've never seen them go that long. Usually I guess if it's kind of a heavy blue versus a heavy blue matchup and you guys are kind of poking each other, they can definitely go a little bit longer, but that will naturally to extent start to bring those decks' power levels down, at least in that matchup specifically. But talking about the power level 10, these decks are going to be able to finish on their turn 2 to their turn 4. It could just be turn 2 to turn 4 in the game just in general. Their opponent gets to go, play a card, they get to go, their opponent gets to go on, let's say, their turn 1, not play a card. They get to go on their turn 2 or their turn 1, kind of set up, and then when it comes back to them, they can just win the game. Or, their opponent gets to go, and then they come back, and on their turn 3, they just combo off, do whatever kind of crazy powerful thing that they do to their opponent, and just kind of win the game. In the level 9 slots, we're going to have games getting pretty close to that 4 to that 6 range. One thing is like bugs. One thing that they're really powerful with, or even with Blaster, is being able to just put out a lot of damage and just really kind of threaten the game early. We also saw some really cool decks at the Energon Invitational that we're going to be we're rocking some really aggressive, really powerful stuff where by their turn 4 after attacking, they were going to reset with their opponent having one character, and they're definitely going, I pretty much win. And now, when I talk about threatening to win the game, it's when both players both kind of know the outcome. It's really easy for you to look at the table board and go, yeah, this game's pretty much over. Oh yeah, he's got me next turn. There's nothing I can do about it. Those are the turns that I'm talking about when things are going to be getting done and the business is going to kind of be coming to an end. The next one is going to be the power level 8, and those are going to be finishing between 6 and 8. When you have that reset, when all the characters stand, and you go from that point, it may be a couple of more turns right before you go to stand again. That's when you're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you have 4 health left. I have, 15 on this or whatever else. You kind of know, again, where that position is going to be. Those turns are starting to whittle down. You as, let's say, I'm the player that's just on the losing end of it. I'm only maybe able to do like 2-3 damage to my opponent, but he's doing like 7 back to me. So even if it's a slugfest between characters, he's just winning the race. It's going to take a few more turns, but he's still going to be getting the job done. Power level 7s are going to be finishing around that like 9 mark to probably, 12, 13 mark, where you, again, those blue matchups, and it's just kind of that slow game back and forth, or you guys just have low damage characters, but you guys are kind of relying on Pierce, and you're just kind of just playing this really slow game back and forth. Whereas like normally if you were going up against someone else who wasn't running something very specific, you would do a lot better, but it's just kind of slowing you down. Or maybe your deck just takes a little bit more to set up. You have some stealth characters, so you have to wait for them to kind of go down. Devastator would be a really good one with them. With the Constructicons is that you kind of want your other characters to go down, be KO'd to kind of build that tower counter up, to be attacking to build that tower counter up. It's going to take you a little bit longer to get there, but you may eventually get there and just win once you, complete whatever you're trying to do or whatever trying to puzzle you're trying to build. And then again, sometimes maybe after you set up all those turns, you end up still going down. Those decks are going to be sitting there. And then everything from probably the 6th level down is going to be finishing kind of after that. It's really difficult to kind of try to gauge those lower levels as far as, when the turn is ending. But essentially, if you're running out of time because you're still in a match, because it's not ended, that decks, or both of those decks, are kind of just going to be on that little bit of that lower end of the power scale. It's just, your job or your idea is to, hit someone for 2 damage a turn. Well, yeah, but they have 30 health, so you're looking at 15 turns. That's a lot. So you also have to hope that your consistent way of doing 2 is going to consistently do it for that long. Again, going to just be kind of really weird one. Or, if it's just taking you, really long time, you're like, hey, I have this one card in my deck, man. When I eventually get to it, then you watch it flip on defense, and you're like, oh, all right. And then you have to reshuffle and then hope you draw it, and then, it flipped on defense again. And then the 3rd time around, you get to it, and then you finally get to win the game. Those games are just taking way too long. So those decks power levels, they're just not tuned that well. Obviously, if you're waiting for that one card, well, you should have 2 of it or 3 of it or a way to get it. There's a bunch of different things that can really kind of change these things. But those are the turns that you're really kind of know a little bit about where your deck is starting to push things. If you know every single time that you stand on, let's say, your turn 4, and that you're finishing off your opponent's second to last character, and they always are down to that one character, you kind of know where that deck's, power level is going to be sitting based on these turns to know, okay, I've got the game with reset. My opponent has to do A, B, and C for him to even have a chance to come back. And, they only did A. Great. Yep, we're in the same spot. And both opponents at these higher levels will start to understand that that's the situation. Go, okay, well, if you have this, you win the game. If you don't, I win the game. Like, there's always those things. And when I say at the higher end, I don't mean a higher player skill level or at a higher tournament. I just mean with these higher power level decks. You can be at your local game store with your one friend that you play with and go, I know I have this deck. You know you have this deck. We've played enough matches to understand how things go. So it's easy to judge your deck in those kind of situations. Now, I talked a little bit about it earlier, talking about Battlefield Legend as an example. Battlefield Legend, if you build around him, can be a really good character and just naturally elevate your deck. However, just because your opponent sits down and shows a Battlefield Legend doesn't mean that their deck is going to be on that 7, 8, 9 tier. There's a chance that they run 6 actions on their deck. So just because you play that character doesn't mean that the deck's power level is just going to automatically be built because of the character. There are 2 ways to do it. You just think that you can add a character and it increases it, which it can if it's built correctly, or you add a character that doesn't really help you out at all and it just lowers it. And you're like, well, this was just a bad character. You can easily go, well, Nemesis Prime is just a meat stick. I'm going to put him in there. He's 12 stars. I'll take out these, 3 characters or 2 characters, and it'll do great. And then you're like, well, now I'm not flipping enough. I'm not getting enough turns. My deck doesn't have the time to set up, and it's actually making your deck worse, even though you put in a really good character. So there are a lot of different things that can make these decks' power levels go up and down. Alrighty, so there you guys have it. There is me trying to explain the best way to be able to break down your deck's power level so you can kind of go into different matches and have a little bit of a better understanding as where your deck sits, if it has the ability to go up, if it doesn't, and making sure that you're just having fair matches. One thing that I try to do when I go to other places like PAX or Gen Con, stuff like that, is I bring a couple of different level decks, and it's because you never know who you're going to play, at least in those situations at big tournaments, where someone comes up and they're like, hey, yeah, I want to play you, and I'm like, okay, well, what are you playing, so I kind of know what, to play back. It's definitely an easy thing to do. It's also really nice if you can build some of these, lower level, power level decks to have just at all times if you're in your local game stores, or just have the game stores have these decks as well. So if you have new people who want to get into the game, you can have a couple of these decks ready to go so you can play, try to introduce a new player to the game, try to show off some of the mechanics, and then if you do have someone who just started and they're like, hey, I'm here for a casual night, I heard you guys play on Tuesdays, you're not all like, oh, well, we have just really good decks and this kid's just going to get crushed and not have fun. Oh, okay, well, hey, store, can I borrow this deck? Or, hey, Bob, can I borrow that, entry-level deck from you? And then you guys can have a fair game, and that person can kind of then watch other decks and then start to, really build that community and that fun stuff. And then again, just so if you're playing a 9, try to sit down, play against another 9 or an 8, and see and have some really fun comparisons. I really hope that this video did help you guys break down your deck's power level. It helps you guys when it comes to playing and deck building a little bit more, and I hope it helps your guys' matches when it comes to playing out there in the wild. If you guys did enjoy, obviously a like would be greatly appreciated, and let me know down in the comment section below what's your deck's power level. I'd be really interested in seeing that, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.